Australia has a lot of jobs, but not enough skilled workers to do them all. It seems like a pretty good problem to have, but only if you can find and train enough people to take up the opportunities. Australia is not short of bodies. In some parts of the country, more than a third of young people are unemployed. But we don't have good enough training and education programs, according to a government report out today. Heather Hewitt reports the federal Labor government would like to keep the focus on policy issues like this one, but leadership questions keep intruding.
You're not going to believe it. You couldn't drive a forklift in this place. It was seriously aborted on a dumping ground. It was very ordinary. The guys used to smoke when they were on the machines. This is only over the last 7 years.
The work habits of old and the days of the traditional blue-collar worker are numbered. And this metalwork factory in Western Sydney has learnt that the hard way. Growing competition and new technology forced a major rethink.
12 years ago, we had one computer in this company. Now we have 28.
Retraining funds from the government to help staff change work practices have dragged this company into the modern day, and it seems given it a new mantra.
I believe the responsibility is management to train their people. It's not a skills shortage, it's a training shortage.
Hello mate, how are we going?
A detailed study released today by the government's new Workforce and Productivity Agency finds it's in fact both, and that industry and training institutions need to make big adjustments to keep up with a rapidly changing economy.
What we know is that the strong growth in the Australian economy is in high-skilled jobs. Low-skilled jobs are disappearing from the economy.
The nature of work is evolving and nobody really knows what it's going to look like.
If Australia gets this right, it gets itself right at the front of the pack, especially in the English-speaking world.
The report calls for a long-term strategy involving workers, employers and training institutions to deal with the growing trend away from manufacturing and the blue-collar job for life into new growth areas.
The jobs of the future are in the high-profile areas like mining, etc., but the largest growth are in areas like health, aged care, community care. A lot of the service sector is going to be where the jobs growth is.
Technical and professional services are predicted to grow strongly, and those services will also require a higher level of education than we've experienced in the past.
Professor Ian Harper, former head of the now defunct Fair Pay Commission, is one of those who contributed to the year-long study, which has come up with this key finding.
In the case of industries and skills, there are a lot of instances where the universities and the training colleges are producing graduates who aren't actually work-ready, but there are also employers who perhaps aren't ready for the sorts of skills that the graduates are coming out with.
We need to think of innovative ways of getting employers to think about how to use the capabilities their workers have.
That is, be more willing to train them. And that also applies to much publicised areas of job shortages, like the mining sector. The message is the same. Workers everywhere must be upskilled.
During the construction phase in the mining sector, we need a lot of people who can, drive trucks, right? Once we move into the operational phase of the mining boom, that'll require a lot of people with technical engineering skills, and they are in short supply or they're in different parts of the country.
It's an all too familiar problem for this company, Heller, on the outskirts of Melbourne, which makes car headlights and lighting equipment for the mining industry.
There's a great need for semi and professional people in this organisation and in mining in general, and we have very great difficulty with the professionals, the engineering in particular.
So the company has taken matters into its own hands.
What we're doing is trying to find some new talent and train within.
It's what the government and the Workforce and Productivity Agency want to encourage more of, but they acknowledge it's a long-term strategy, especially in areas of high youth unemployment, like northwestern Melbourne, where 39% of young people are out of jobs.
We need to ensure that our young people get onto that skills ladder as quickly as they can, because their future livelihood depends on that.
The wide-ranging discussion paper will now be taken to city and regional communities around the country for input. But as is so often the case when the government tries to announce something positive, it can't get clear air. And that's because, once again, leadership speculation is in the headlines. This time, a front-page story in the Australian Financial Review today suggesting the union movement is turning against Julia Gillard.
Those reports aren't worth the paper they're written on. We seem to get them all the time. They're not true.
Senior union leaders present at a meeting this week to impose a levy on members for an election campaign fighting fund strongly deny a move away from support for the Prime Minister. They're furious over the leak that the state of the federal party was even discussed, which it was. The Prime Minister enjoyed the strong backing of unions in the last ballot against Kevin Rudd, but some person or persons involved in that meeting earlier this week either talked too much or wanted to cause trouble for Julia Gillard. Kevin Rudd backers are certainly portraying a union shift in his favour, and once again, senior ministers were having to publicly defend their leader today.
The Prime Minister has the support of her caucus and me personally.
And so the working week draws to a close pretty much as it began, with more talk of leadership, first instigated by the government whip turned Rudd supporter Joel Fitzgibbon on the ABC's Q&A program on Monday night.
If leaders remain unpopular long enough, they'll inevitably stop leading the party.
That was viewed by Julia Gillard's backers as a calculated but clumsy effort to keep the leadership question alive during the long winter break from Parliament. The whip is one of at least 8 others known to have shifted allegiances to Kevin Rudd. They include the Victorian Right's Richard Marles, who's a parliamentary secretary, and another Right colleague, Kelvin Thompson, who believe they're on the promise of promotions in any Rudd team. So far, the only response from the Prime Minister has been this.
We dealt with the question of leadership in February and it was resolved then.
There's no doubt that even Julia Gillard's closest backers in the ministry are disappointed and frustrated with her performance. But at least 8 firm votes switching back to Kevin Rudd hardly means he's on the cusp of seizing back his old job. He'd need a lot more support for that to happen, even if some members are getting increasingly wobbly. Right now, the fact is, despite the overwhelming despair in the party, they're still balking at a return to the man they ousted. And there's no grand plan on either side about what to do next.
Heather Hewitt reporting.